Good day, everyone. We will be presenting to you our chosen re-emerging disease, poliomyelitis, also known as polio. Presenting to you is I, Karmelle Seronay, and Mr. Melvin Villacote. Here is the outline of our presentation, starting with the introduction, defining emerging and re-emerging diseases, followed by presenting our chosen re-emerging disease, poliomyelitis. Next is the pathogen that causes polio, then the history of polio, showing the timeline of significant events, then the stages of development of our chosen disease, and lastly is the treatment and intervention of polio. So what are emerging and re-emerging diseases? Emerging diseases are those whose incidence in humans has increased in the past 2 decades. Re-emerging disease is the reappearance of a known disease after a significant decline in incidence. Re-emergence may happen because of a breakdown in public health measures for diseases that were once under control. They can also happen when new strains of known disease-causing organisms appear. Polio is considered a re-emerging disease because of recent outbreaks that have been recorded from different countries around the world. The Philippine Department of Health today announced an outbreak of polio in the country. A poliovirus case was confirmed on September 2019 in a 3-year-old girl from Lanao del Sur. Polio or poliomyelitis is a viral infectious disease which may affect the spinal cord, causing muscle weakness and paralysis. The virus often spreads through contact with infected feces. It can be spread when an infected child coughs or sneezes infected droplets into the air. People with weakened immune systems, such as pregnant women and children, are the most susceptible to the poliovirus. Polio is caused by the human enterovirus of the Picornaviridae family, the poliovirus. The virus enters the body through the mouth. It is spread through contact with feces of an infected person or through exposure to phlegm or mucus when an infected person coughs or sneezes. The virus is composed of a single-stranded, positive RNA genome and a protein capsid. The 3 serotypes that the poliovirus carries are antigenically distinct. The history of polio. In 1894, the first major documented polio outbreak in the United States occurred in Vermont, with 18 deaths and 132 cases of permanent paralysis are reported. In 1916, a major polio outbreak in New York City kills more than 2,000 people. As poliovirus continued to kill hundreds or even thousands of people around the globe, a safe and effective vaccine was developed by Dr. John Salk, and Rotary International and the World Health Organization launched the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, which finally led to polio-free regions. In 1944, the World Health Organization region of the Americas is certified polio-free. In 2000, the World Health Organization Western Pacific region is certified polio-free. In 2002, the World Health Organization European region is certified polio-free. And after India went 3 full years without a new case, the World Health Organization certified the Southeast Asia region polio-free, which is now, the cases are down over to 99% since 1988. And lastly, in 2017, polio remained endemic in only 3 countries: Afghanistan, Nigeria, and Pakistan. And lastly, for the re-emergence of the poliovirus. Sadly, in 2019, the Philippines declared an outbreak of polio. 2 cases have been reported to date, both caused by vaccine-derived poliovirus type 2, VDPV2. Environmental samples taken from sewage in Manila on 13 August and waterway in Davao on 22 August have also tested positive for VDPV2.
At this point, we will examine how poliovirus infects its patients. We will have an overview of its infecting mechanism, as well as its developmental stages and its possible interventions. The virus enters through the mouth and multiplies in the throat and gastrointestinal tract, then moves into the bloodstream and is carried to the central nervous system, where it replicates and destroys the motor neuron cells. Motor neuron controls the muscles for swallowing, circulation, respiration, and the trunk, arms, and legs. Human nerve cells have protruding receptors on their surface. When poliovirus encounters the nerve cells, the receptors attach to the virus particle and then infection begins. Once inside the cell, the virus hijacks the cell's assembly process and makes thousands of copies of itself in hours. The virus kills the cell and spreads to infect other cells. Most people who get infected with poliovirus will not have any visible symptoms. People with poliovirus infection will have flu-like symptoms that may include sore throat, fever, tiredness, nausea, headache, and stomach pain. But these symptoms usually last 2 to 5 days, then go away on their own. A smaller proportion of people with poliovirus infection will develop other more serious symptoms that affect the brain and spinal cord, including paresthesia, the feeling of pins and needles in the legs. In some cases, it causes meningitis, or infection of the covering of the spinal cord and the brain, and paralysis, or weakness in the arms and legs. Paralysis is more severe symptoms associated with polio because it can lead to permanent disability and even death. About 10% of people who have paralysis from poliovirus infection die because the virus affects the muscles that help them breathe. Note that poliomyelitis is defined as a paralytic disease, so only people with the paralytic symptoms are considered to have the disease. Polio has 3 pathological stages. First is the elementary stage. After gaining access to the body through the nasopharynx on the gastrointestinal tract, the virus multiplies in the epithelial cells of the intestinal mucosa. Next is the viremic stage, where the virus spreads through the bloodstream, and after a sort of conflict between the virus and the antibodies, in case the virus turns victorious, then it leads to the 3rd stage, and then the neural stage, where the virus finds its way to the anterior horn cells of the spinal cords and neurons in the brain stem. The clinical course of the disease is divided into 5 stages. First, the prodromal stage, or the invasion stage. This happens in a few hours to 3 days of infection. Signs and symptoms include headache, sore throat, malaise, slight cough, diarrhea, or constipation. The only practical measure which can be taken is to stop physical activity and other such manual work if possible. In the pre-paralytic stage or in the meningitic stage, the virus has already penetrated the central nervous system and is multiplying. Clinically, there may be a major illness with fever, headache, and neck stiffness. The patient is in a critical phase, so he must be rested immediately because fatigue may precipitate paralysis and may increase its severity. Second is the acute or the paralytic stage, which happens 7 to 10 days from the onset of poliomyelitis. In this stage, most reflexes are absent. Signs and symptoms include muscle tenderness, which is the most important sign seen in this stage. To treat the disease in this stage, rest is highly needed. The patient should not be overhandled. Interventions also include isolation, analgesic intake, and a diet rich in protein. Third is the convalescent stage or the recovery stage. The virus is dead but has destroyed a variable number of nerve cells. The patient is no longer ill in himself, and paralysis to some extent recovers. The patient's recovery is assisted by physical treatment and by training, while intermittent splintage is often required. Last is the definitive or the chronic stage. In this stage, there is permanent residual paralysis with deformity and trophic changes. It usually begins 24 months after the acute illness. It is also the stage where orthopedic intervention is needed. As far as the actual paralysis is concerned, the patient may be affected by isolated weakness and unbalanced paralysis in muscles. Further true recovery is impossible in this stage. Interventions must now be concentrated on minimizing the functional effects of the paralysis, largely by apparatus or by surgery. That is all about the re-emerging poliomyelitis, and we hope that you have learned something about the infectious disease.